previously associated with Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. He has worked extensively as marine archaeologist and has undertaken the exploration and excavation of submerged ports and shipwrecks at both coasts of India. Dr. R.D. Tripathi, advisor to the Indian Port Association, he deals with policy issues connected with human resources, environment, safety, dredging, various risk management in port planning, operation, and administration of all 12 major ports of India. Dr. Arindam Banerjee is currently an associate professor in economics at the School of Liberal Studies, Ambedkar University, Delhi. He teaches and researches in the area of agrarian development, colonialism, political economy, food security, poverty, and biofuels. Due to paucity of time, I request all speakers to limit their speech to 5 to 6 minutes. The session will be followed by a question and answer session. I now hand over the mic to Professor Shinde and request him to begin the proceedings for the session.
Good afternoon to all. First, I would like to thank the organizers for arranging this session. And the discussion on Indian Ocean cannot be completed without understanding the history of the Indian Ocean. And I am fortunate to have this good panel today. Professor Umesh Kadam has worked extensively on the medieval history and the modern history, and he has also worked on the trade aspects and the history of the Maratha Navy. Dr. Sila Tripathi was associated with the NIO, and he was associated with the underwater archaeology, the only institute in the country. I am also happy that Professor Banerjee is here. I think the Ambedkar University has a very good collection, in fact, of Lotika Varadarajan. Am I right? And he will be speaking maybe about the economics of the maritime history. And Dr. Tripathi, he is advisor to the Indian Ports Association and very much part of the National Maritime Heritage Complex. Now, friends, I'll just begin with some important and interesting facets and the facts. All of you talk about the Harappan culture. Now let me tell you that Harappans are the founders of the Indian culture, because most of the elements that they initiated, including the maritime history, maritime trade, maritime contacts, now most of the objects have continued till today without much change. So we consider them as the founders of the Indian culture, Indian tradition. Now what is interesting about this? I'm sure that a lot of you know about the history of the Harappans, but very few people know about the contribution made by the Harappans to the history of the nation and to the history of the world. And one of the most important contribution that the Harappans made was in fact development of the maritime trade contact. They were the first to realize in the world the importance of trade. They were at very disadvantageous position because they did not have a lot of resources available within the Harappan region. So they had to acquire these raw materials from the adjoining regions which were controlled by the contemporary population through maybe developing the good connection with them. And then they had the technology with them. They started processing the goods on a very large scale, and there was a greater demand. So what they did, in fact, by using the trade as a tool for the development, they started generating a lot of wealth. And this wealth, they generated wealth from the hinterland communities, and also they went beyond and collected a lot of wealth from the international communities also. Literally, they were plundering the West. They were plundering the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians, because the archaeological records that we have clearly indicate that a lot of things were sent by the Harappans to that region. And there is very little evidence of things coming from that region. Even the Mesopotamian text also does not mention many things coming from that region to Meluha or the Harappan region. So by undertaking this particular tactics, the Harappans could generate a lot of wealth. And this wealth was used by the Harappans for the development purpose. We always compare the Harappans with the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. And we feel that the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians were much more advanced because they were the ones, in fact, who have created or developed the large monumental architecture like pyramids, ziggurats, and large size images. And we feel that the Harappans were not competent or capable of doing that. But let me tell you that the Harappans had completely different philosophy. The Harappans were considered to be the best civil engineers in the contemporary world. And had they decided to develop this type of monumental architecture, they could have easily done that. But they have not done that because they knew that this is of no use to the common people. So a lot of wealth that was coming from the West, that was used by the Harappans for developing the cultural elements. And they were the first in this part of the world to develop from rural culture to the urban culture. And that wealth that they generated was used for that particular purpose. And they have the trade strategy that the Harappans develop that has a relevance even today. A lot of countries have learned about the Harappan strategy. I always give the example of Japan. Japan was almost completely destroyed in the Second World War, and nobody thought that Japan will rise again. But friends, you know that Japan rose within 15 years, and they showcased the tremendous economic development that they made within 15 years during the Tokyo Olympics in 1964. And the strategy adopted by Japan was exactly same as the Harappan strategy. Japan had the technology like the Harappans had. Japan did not have the natural resources. So they started importing natural resources from India, China, all these developing countries. They produced goods on large scale. And they started supplying the goods to the same people from whom they were acquiring raw materials. That is how Japan could collect so much wealth. And that was the strategy adopted by the Harappans. So there's a lot of relevance. There's a lot of things which we can learn from the Harappans. What they did, in fact, Harappans did, they first tried to create the infrastructure for the maritime trade, even hinterland trade also. So they developed a lot of production centers, what we call as the industrial units, where they were producing the goods on mass scale, and also simultaneously to facilitate the maritime trade activities. They developed the infrastructure for that. So they were the first people in the world to develop the maritime, the dockyard. Now the dockyard that's found at Lothal. Now let me tell you, since we have some Indian Navy people, when it was excavated in 1950, 55, 56, S.R. Rao, from the Archaeological Survey of India, now he took some delegates from the Indian Navy, and he showed the structures to the Indian Navy people without telling what we think about that particular structure. And Indian Navy, I think Commodore Bindra was there. So without understanding, without asking S.R. Rao, he said that the only function of this particular structure is a dockyard, because the associated remains and the associated structural elements that they studied, that could lead to them to understand this particular structure. So this is a very, very important structure. For the first time, Indians have developed this particular architecture, and this particular architecture was meant for not only for trade purpose, but for building ships and boats, for repairing the ships and boats. So we were the first, in fact, in the world to develop this particular aspect, and then perhaps the world has adopted from us. Not that we have learned from the Romans, so that is not true. And then, of course, the trade activities continues because of the maritime trade. We could develop the urbanization here. First, during the Harappan times. Secondly, there was some lull, in fact, after the decline of the Harappans. Again, this maritime trade was revived in the early Stoic period during the contact with the Roman Empire. And again, we could generate a lot of wealth, and that wealth was used for developing second urbanization in the country. So that is how this maritime trade was used for the development purpose. Now we have such a large coastline, more than 7,500 kilometer long state coastline, There are 9 states, modern states, and 3 or 4 union territories along the coast. And these states and the maritime, the uh, uh, the territories, union territories, they are very vast, in fact, wealth. There are a lot of sites along the coast. There are a large number of sites right from the early Stone Age to the modern times. You'll be surprised to know that this travel, in fact, this oceanic travel started, in fact, during the Stone Age period, and it is believed that maybe around 2 million years ago, maybe 20 lakhs years ago, the Stone Age people from Africa, they landed on the coast of India, and then this is how the colonization happened, in fact, in this part. But of course, there is a lot of debate happening on that. But what is interesting is that people have used this particular trade, particular facilities for the trade purpose, and it has continued. In fact, we know the remains that we have found, in fact, during the early historic period, how we were connected to the Roman world, Greek world also. Subsequently, we started developing the cultural contact with Southeast Asia, even beyond, in fact, China, Korea, and Japan, and a lot of cultural elements. Maybe our religions have traveled through these maritime trade routes. Our cultures have traveled to the maritime trade routes, and a lot of your languages also must have traveled. So this is a very, very interesting, very fascinating, history that we have. And for the first time now, because of the initiative of the Honorable Prime Minister, that we are developing the maritime, National Maritime Heritage Museum. And in this museum, at one place, we are going to showcase, the entire maritime history of the country. I'm sure that this will be very, very interesting, because we know that, in our lifetime, we are not able to study the maritime history of all the coastal states. But at this particular place, we can do that. And secondly, the other objective that we have is that we are also developing the Maritime Research Institute there, where people from different maritime, maybe Indian Ocean countries can come there, and they can start or initiate their research. So these are the elements that we are developing, by the government of India is developing. And I'm sure that because of this development, there is going to be tremendous attraction of the tourists there. And the benefit of that, economic benefit of that, is going to go to the remote place of the country. So this is how the developments have to be taken place. So because of the time limit, I'm going to stop here. But then I will invite Professor Umesh Kadam to say a few words about the maritime history. And at the end of that, maybe we can have some time for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. The honorable dais and dignitaries on the dais, the chairman for this first session, Professor Vasant Shindeji, and co-participants with me, Professor Seela Tripathi, Dr. R.D. Tripathi, Dr. Arindam from Ambedkar University, Delhi, and of course my friend Manish Tiwari ji for inviting me over here. The session is on history and culture of seas, ships and travels. The question which rises to my mind is that who are the best mariners in the world? And the world knows that the best mariners, always they talk about one person which is known as Vasco da Gama, and the other is Columbus. But the problem with both of them is that they lost their route, and then they found something by chance. And which was been found by chance was been said that it is a greatest discovery which was been done. Greatest discoveries cannot be done by chance. How has our great country Bharat been contributing has not been underlined historically, and the failure actually lies among the shoulders of the historians of India, because they have not tried to understand the maritime history of India. They have not visualized it. They have not been able to understand the depths and the seriousness. And hence, ICHR is trying to redo history, rewrite history in the form of bringing out the comprehensive history of India. It is also working out a big project with ISRO on history of science and technology, wherein we have a pool of scientists who will be working with us to understand the historical uh, lineages of India. And we are also having one project which is going on, which has been floated as economic history of India. In all these three projects, this component of maritime history is very, very important. It's so important because India was a contributor to the world's economy. In the ancient times, India was contributing roughly nothing less than 34%. And by the time it reached to what is known as the Madhyakal, medieval, we were participating nearly in the 24%. Our participation was 24%. By the time we reached the 17th, 18th, 19th century, the colonial world, our participation went down to 0.5%. Now, how big was the contribution of the riverine trade, the coastal trade, the high sea trade? What were the maritime activities? And who were the active participants, which are the Indian dynasties which were taking active participation, and what was the influence and confluence of the Indian people across needs to be understood. What historians have been doing all these years is that we have been concentrating more on the Coromandel coast and the western coast of India, trying to understand how the British East India Company formulated the whole idea of India and its maritime trade. But if we have to compare the British East India Company, then we need to understand the role of the French East India Company, the role of the Dutch East India Company, the role of the Portuguese East India Company. What was the share of trade which was being happening across? And before that, we need to also understand our great Satavahanas, who were maritime rulers, the Cholas, who were maritime rulers, and of course, the most magnetic, influential personality, Chhatrapati Shivaji, who challenged the Western world by saying that we have sovereignty over the sea. By building Padma Durga, by constructing Sindhu Durga, by constructing Vijay Durga. And today, what is happening to Vijay Durga? Vijay Durga is on the verge of collapsing. Here in Delhi, we are discussing about maritime, and the greatest icon of Indian naval system, maritime trade, there over in Vijay Durga, is collapsing in the sea. ASI and all other important bodies, ICHR will be writing to them, no doubt about it. Now, when we talk about Chhatrapati Shivaji, we all say that Chhatrapati Shivaji was only interested in defending the sea coast, and it was a military activity. Shivaji had ships, nearly 200 ships, which were the naval fleet, and nearly more than 200 ships were trading ships. Marathas were actively involved in the world economy in the 17th century. Trade was very much being done till Aden and Basra. But this history has not been traced. The history of the Satavahana trade, which went on to Rome, has not been traced. Who are the players? Which are the communities? There are references within that the Europeans were constantly asking for the skilled labor of India because they were unable to understand how the Indian ships were being flanked. The procedure of flanking the ship, the procedure of constructing the hull of the ship was being done with utmost care. If there is very less time in the sessions, then you should always see that you call only 2 people in the sessions, rather than having a battery in the sessions. Anyways, I thank the seminar organizers over here for giving us the honor to come over here, having a small discussion with you. But we would like to discuss, we'd like to have this discourse being done more seriously with all scholars who are interested in this field. I would also request Professor Vasant Shinde that we have already secured one good place for ICHR, that is the Fort of Sanklem in Goa. And if you could please collaborate with us at the Fort of Sanklem with what you have been doing at Lothal, so the maritime exhibition can also be brought over there. What ICHR, I am just going to have last 1 minute, ICHR is going to bring out a huge exhibition on the glory of medieval India. And this exhibition हम राष्ट्र को समर्पित कर रहे हैं आने वाले 30 जनवरी को. ये साहित्य कला अकादमी में दिखाया जाएगा, wherein we are highlighting 50 Indian dynasties of medieval India, wherein you will be able to understand what is the scientific temperament, what is the technological pursuit, what is the spiritual and understatements, how languages developed within the medieval world, and how knowledge systems were being established, how great libraries were being established by the great Indian minds, apart from the classic world. And the medieval world is not only about the Mughals and the Sultans. Apart from that, there are 50 such dynasties. Every dynasty has a separate panel. So I request you all to kindly visit on 30th of January at Sahitya Akademi at 11 o'clock and kindly come forward and give your suggestions and comments on whatever work ICHR is been carrying out. Because this exhibition is especially being done for the schools and universities across India. So I again thank all of you for giving me this time to be with you and hearing me out patiently over here. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.
So friends, I am really thankful to Professor Umesh Kadam for giving a brief idea about the medieval history and the importance of the maritime trade and the activities. I think I will request the organizers next time they should have one maybe full day session on this so that we can discuss. Within this short 5 minutes, perhaps we are not able to bring out the essence of the maritime trade and its importance. So we'll move to the next one. I will now invite Dr. Sila Tripathi for giving his thoughts on this.
Namaskar. I am thankful to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share my work on the maritime archaeology of India, that is known as marine archaeology, which started in India 1986 and 87, and the underwater archaeological exploration started from 1993-94. And I was associated with that project from 1988. During our explorations, we have carried out underwater diving, videography, photography, all kind of surveys in Dwarka, Pumpuhar, Vijayadurg, Mahabalipuram, Bet Dwarka, Lakshadweep, Odisha, and other parts of India. During our survey, we have found submerged ports, submerged settlements, man and sea relationship, shipwrecks. Besides that, we have also studied on the traditional boat building. And during our study, we have provided some information to reconstruct the history of our country. For instance, people have read that Hippolytus discovered monsoon wind. Okay. And secondly, that traditional boat building, I mean, everything is borrowed from foreign countries. But our Harappans were no doubt they were the mariners, ancient mariners of our country, they were having the trade relations with Mesopotamia and all those things. And there is a text which has been deciphered in the Mesopotamian region, which clearly states that Melua region and what kind of goods and artifacts were transported from India and what things were coming. But coming back to east coast of India, if we will see the maritime trade, see the Satavahana coins and Sangam period text and so many other evidences clearly provide the information that the mariners of east coast of India were also equally, they had the knowledge of sailing to different part of the world. And who were these mariners in the early historical period? The Buddhists were the mariners and the Hindu people were the mariners. Because all along the Southeast Asia, for instance, in Thailand, there are few sites which has been excavated. The evidences clearly show that the former name, the earlier name of Gautama Buddha called Sakya Sima, okay? The carnelian beads which girls use as a pendant and other things in the form of line. And the pottery, there is one kind of pottery called knobbed ware, which we use in our Hindu tradition. The similar kind of pottery was used by Buddhist monks. Even till today, the Buddhist monks, they use those kind of pottery for using, for begging. That is called begging bowl. Okay. Similarly, we have located several shipwrecks. For instance, because the Indian literature gives us information about Indian shipwrecks, but because of various reasons, for instance, visibility. I know diving, I have dived up to 35 meters in Indian waters and more than 155 feet in this Mediterranean world. But in India, we were not, why, though records clearly suggest we have having the shipwrecks, the basic problem is visibility. Okay. When we dive, I cannot see in some places more than 1 meter or more than half a meter. Okay. That is the biggest problem. And this problem has been discussed in various forums, both in India and abroad. Okay? So in India, we have located a shipwreck which is the early 17th century. There we have found elephant tusks, hippopotamus teeth, and so many things. While working on it, we came to know that when the Vasco da Gama and others, when they came for trade, which the trade was there earlier during the Roman period for the spices. And to accelerate the trade system, what they did, they were coming along the west coast, in the African coast. They were bringing their cargo from Europe. They were unloading in African coast. They were taking these hippopotamus teeth, other things, to India, and they were selling in India. And in Goa, in Bharat, Gujarat, and other places where there were number of traditional craftsmanship, again they were making the finished artifacts, and again they were taking those things and selling. So if you will see some museums, you will find very good carved, nice elephant and ivory artifacts. Those were made in India. And so Portuguese people, what they started, they were gaining two profits in one business. So that system they had introduced. And coming back to what Vijayadurg, our Dr. Kadamji was mentioned, we had worked in Vijayadurg waters and we have found one underwater wall. Okay. See, there were two purposes of making that is datable to Maratha period. One was Maratha ships were smaller in size than the European ships. And the fort is located around half a kilometer, on the seashore, but the depth where we have found the structure is around 5 to 7 meters. This is half a kilometer. So when the Europeans were using the cannons to destroy the fort, they have to come much closer because of during those kind of artillery. So they were unaware of that wall. So the purpose was to destroy after hitting. Second one is, west coast of India is prone to cyclones and severe monsoon wind. So when the winds come and waves come, to protect the fort. And secondly, in Vijayadurg and in Sindhudurg, for the first time, we have recorded the evidence of reuse of stone anchors. The stone anchors were used prior to the implementation or use of iron anchors. And different kind of iron anchors has been used. And me, my colleagues, and Dr. Sinde, we were working on it for our National Maritime Heritage Complex. And I request the authorities, to bring those iron anchors. One anchor is in Shivaji, they tell it is in the Lal Bahadur Shastri Institute in Bombay. I will tell you, we have an anchor found in Goa waters of the contemporary period. Because of lack of care, the anchor has been destroyed already, the anchor which is there in Mumbai. Similarly, there are number of anchors and all those things. So for the first time, we have noticed the reuse of stone anchors in Vijayadurg and Sindhudurg. And as he suggested, we have lot of maritime evidence and information. We should keep it a track. And there is a lot of opportunity for the young students to pursue this maritime archaeology as their career. Thank you very much, and namaskar.
Friends, I thank Dr. Sila Tripathi. Now, unfortunately, we have such a large coastline, but we do not have proper, in any university system, proper underwater archaeology department. So our students face a lot of difficulties. They have to travel to maybe European or some American countries for this. But I think with the initiative of ICHR, perhaps this gap can be filled in, and maybe we'll request ICHR, Professor Kadam is here, that they take initiative in initiating large-scale maybe maritime research activity in the country. Of course, our aim is different, but that knowledge that is generated, that should be disseminated to the students and the public at large. So that will certainly happen in future. Now next, I will request Dr. R.D. Tripathi to speak about the National Maritime Heritage Museum that is coming up in Lothal. Now this museum is going to showcase the maritime history right from the early stage, right from the prehistoric times, how the movement was happening, and then of course the maritime trade right from the Harappans till modern times. Apart from that, of course, we are also showcasing the maritime, the tangible and intangible heritage of the country, the traditional shipbuilding activities, navigation activities. So he's going to show a small film on that, on the National Maritime Heritage Complex and the Maritime Museum, and maybe he can say a few words about that. Dr. Tripathi, please.
Very good afternoon. Kindly play that video. Just wait 1 minute. Basically, this
India
video
is blessed.
Okay, let it play first.
500-kilometer coastline that has played a significant role in the economy of the nation and also in connecting and dispersing cultural elements across the world. Under the able guidance and leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, the Government of India's Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways has embarked on the journey of developing the first of its kind National Maritime Heritage Complex NMHC at Lothal, Gujarat, the world's earliest known dockyard, to showcase India's ancient, rich and diverse maritime heritage. The maritime trade activities were introduced by the Harappan civilization 4,500 years back, which continued through different phases of history till date. NMHC is being developed as a major tourist destination and includes a state-of-art maritime museum, lighthouse museum, Lothal town recreation, coastal states pavilions, maritime institute, theme parks, hotels, and eco-resorts. The site for NMHC is located at a distance of 85 kilometers from Ahmedabad. The upcoming international airport at Dholera will help in establishing NMHC as an international destination. The design of the NMHC was guided by the Harappan town planning principles. The citadel, situated at the highest point of the site, would house the most important buildings. The middle town and lower town would contain the remaining parts of the town, based on hierarchy of spaces. Here, at NMHC, the National Maritime Museum is the citadel. The middle town includes the Central Bagicha and Maritime Institute. The lower town consists of recreational theme parks, eco-resorts and hotels. Central Bagicha is an urban solution to the tourist destination of NMHC, which is envisaged to have a footfall of up to 25,000 people a day. The elevated ring road is planned to ease the traffic and create a grand entrance and drop-off announcing the project. The presence of a water tank in the middle of the museum is stimulated by the Harappan Great Bath. The museum circulation at the lower level reminds one of being submerged in the rich heritage of Indian maritime. The museum has been curated to have 14 theme-based galleries. Ranging from Harappan era to modern times, with the emergence of Indian Navy and its prowess. Besides, one dedicated gallery for children and a 5D theatre. A mini recreation of Lothal is set in the heart of the museum, surrounded by water. It will replicate the ancient houses, streets and markets of Harappan settlements, reminding visitors of how life was in the Harappan town. The entertainment zone at the south plot brings recreational options in the form of maritime and naval theme park, adventure and amusement park, monuments park, and climate change theme park. Life-size recreation of Lothal is proposed at the Heritage Theme Park in the south plot. The surrounding coastal states pavilions will allow different coastal states and union territories to converge and celebrate regional food, arts, culture, and shipbuilding techniques. NMHC offers hospitality options in the form of museum-themed hotels and maritime-themed eco-resorts, which aim to instill a sustainable way of living. With the efficient waterway connectivity, tourists can travel from their hotel or resort to the museum. They will arrive at the Lothal jetty and proceed to enjoy various activities at the museum and the sound and light show at the central courtyard. The museum complex will be developed using futuristic technology, with an endeavor of creating an immersive atmosphere, attracting visitors of all ages to experience a living theatrical representation through digital media technology and narrate a story about the history and richness of our maritime and Harappan heritage. With use of high-definition audiovisual technologies, we shall run stories and dynamic and interactive content for a complete audiovisual experience. The vision for NMHC is not only to celebrate the heritage of Indian maritime, but also to develop a tourist destination with content for people of all age groups and from different walks of life. NMHC envisages exhibiting at one place the entire tangible and intangible coastal heritage of the country and helping to protect it and create awareness amongst the people. The National Maritime Heritage Complex finds its place in a unique, historic and spatial context between one of the world's most ancient dockyard towns at Lothal and a new, ambitious tourist and cultural center.
Basically, this museum and this complex has started, and it is been led by the Government of India and planned by the Government of India, but with the people's participation. Basic objective is to bring the entire knowledge and heritage and the whatever skills are available throughout the country or even the corners of the world. Those things will be hosted here, and it will be presented in a most modern and interesting manner. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Tripathi, for showing this film and giving some idea about the upcoming museum at Lothal. But let me tell you, friend, that this is going to be the largest museum of its kind in the world in terms of content, and also in terms of size, perhaps the first or second largest in fact in the world. This project is developed over an area of almost 400 acres given by the Gujarat government. And as Dr. Tripathi has mentioned, in fact, most of the modern digital technologies, conventional technologies are going to be used for the display purpose, for storytelling, etc. So this is going to be a very, very unique and very happening museum in the country. And the plan is that maybe next March 2024, the first phase of the museum is going to be inaugurated by the Honorable Prime Minister of the country, Sri Narendra Modi ji. And then, of course, it will be open. But then, of course, after that also, the museum is going to be continued to be developed further also. So it is not only museum, in fact. We are, as is mentioned, that this is a tourist destination. So we are prepared. We are making the arrangements, facilities for the tourists also in the form of hotels, motels, and maybe various entertainment programs also at the site. So this is the new project that is happening in the country. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Tripathi. And the last, I will invite Dr. Arindam Banerjee for saying few words about his views.
Chair and co-panelists, first I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share my views in this very interesting project, conference, discourse building that is being undertaken. Given the paucity of time, I'll take advantage of the fact that my co-panelists have already, to the limited extent possible, have foregrounded the maritime history in the Indian Ocean. Of course, there's a lot more to be discussed, but I like to focus or draw your attention to two different events. One, which we trace back to the early 16th century, and the other, which is, of course, much more discussed, which is in the early 19th century. The first, with the entry of the Europeans, a major change that happened in the Indian Ocean trade is in the culture of trade. Prior to the entry of Europeans, you find, and historically, the Indian Ocean trade is in a sense unique or has its own character because there are four major powers which are actually using these waters for trade. The Chinese, the Indian subcontinent, again various dynasties there, the Persians, the Arabs. And there is no evidence in terms of trade being militarized or trade happening accompanied by naval forces prior to the 16th century. Now, this is something that was already happening by that time in the Mediterranean Ocean because of the early, right from the time of the Crusades, which was also a way of capturing trading routes, establishing their monopoly on trading routes. That culture was already there amongst both the Europeans as well as the Arab traders in the Mediterranean Ocean. But you don't find that in a very prominent way in the Indian Ocean. Now, with the entry of the Europeans, of course, that changed, particularly the Portuguese. And I'll just like to kind of read out a very small passage from Ashin Das Gupta's work on Malabar and the Asian trade, Malabar in Asian trade. He writes that the Portuguese were important not because they were violent, although they certainly were, but because they were original. They brought with them a new kind of trading which was substantially different from the Asian trade. Both, of course, were still medieval, and the newness which was Portuguese could not alter the systems of production and distribution prevalent in Asia. Still, the important difference is that the Arab merchants of Calicut were convinced that the Portuguese were not traders, but they were pirates. Their apprehension, by and large, came true. The Portuguese gradually elaborated a complex system of compulsion. So there's a compulsion in trade which kind of emerges with the incursion of the Portuguese, which eventually, if you see, Professor Kadam was referring to the not only to the English East India Company, but all the East India companies, which is a system of monopoly chartered companies controlling trade. Now that system then eventually kind of becomes or gives the characteristic of monopoly trade in the Indian Ocean, which eventually the English East India Company is monopolizing all trade, at least for the British Indian territories in the Indian Ocean. More in the eastern side, a little later in the western side. Now, coming to the second, or fast forwarding 3 centuries into the beginning of the 19th century, the beginning of the first half of the 19th century, again widely noted by historians, is the century where India is losing its advantage in world trade, primarily because of the loss of the market for manufactured goods, handicrafts, cotton handicrafts primarily, which is seeing a precipitous decline in this by around 1840. Often the mainstream economic history or historian discourse has kind of focused on technological obsolescence, that you could not compete with the machine-made goods. But when we look at some evidence, we find that may not be entirely true. But there might be other reasons why it really kind of declined. Of course, today, if you kind of compare handicrafts with machine-made goods, machine-made goods are manufactured at a much cheaper cost. In an inquiry by the House of Commons in 1813, which was mainly about whether to extend the charter of the English East India Company further, but they were also trying to find out whether there would be a market for machine-made goods in India. The English machine-made goods. It is revealed that there is a major disparity in terms of import duties. In England, they are on calicos, the import duty was somewhere between 70 to 80%, depending on the surcharges that are levied. On muslins, it is close to 80%. Colored cloths are prohibited. Whereas in India, on machine-made manufactured goods, the import duties are between the customs duties are 2.5 to 3.5%. So practically, it's free trade. Now, this kind of a distorted free trade was at the center of the decline of the Indian goods not entering the English markets. But the story doesn't stop there. I think there is also a role of the particular kind of monopoly trade that emerged in the Indian Ocean, particularly with the spearheaded by the East India Company, English East India Company, which had a monopoly over, which was basically had a monopoly over purchase of cotton cloth, which then was being diverted systematically out of the world markets. There is some evidence that has emerged which shows that the English East India Company, because it cannot take the goods inside England, is largely re-exporting the goods and re-exporting the goods largely to the New World, to the Americas, where the Indian goods are being used for payments to slaves, or the modern slavery that has emerged, which meant that the Indian goods were, in a sense, through the monopoly system of trade, also systematically kind of removed from the markets, which, of course, the English industries, textile industries captured in a very dramatic and rapid fashion. The British historian H. Wilson actually says that the British had to kind of impose these import duties of 70 to 80%, because without those, the mills of Manchester and Lancashire and Paisley would not have kind of run again, even with the power of steam. So he kind of identifies it in Mill's history of British India, that it is not so much about technological obsolescence, but more about the system of import duties, restriction of trade, but also the system of monopoly trade which came to dominate the Indian Ocean, which eventually kind of led to this kind of a colonial subjugation, where India loses out its share in the world trade because it loses out on exporting value added products and becomes a specializer in more of primary products, food products. So I'll leave you with that thought, and maybe we can discuss more. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. Now, I think one very important point that is is coming out is that the Indian knowledge system now that has traveled beyond the boundaries of India, and that is why that is being adopted by a number of countries, mainly because that knowledge system is so relevant, and even a lot of people find that relevant even today, and therefore this has been in practice in fact in different parts, and right from the early stage, right from the Harappan times, we have never forced our cultural elements or philosophy on any country. So this is a peaceful, people have adopted, peacefully. For example, this Indonesia, this is a, Islamic country, but, recently, they have established a university which they call as the, Sugriva University. Their airline, national airline is, named as Garuda University, Garuda Airlines. So, they are adopting, in fact, and they found that, these Indian, elements are really very important. And these aspects, in fact, we are going to showcase in the National Maritime, Heritage and the museum that is coming up. So with this, I think, we have finished our presentation. And now, maybe we can take some quick questions, in fact, for the panels, if anyone has any questions. Any discussion you want to make, we are, here to do that. I think if no questions, perhaps we can close this, because already we have surpassed the time. And again, I would like to thank the organizers, Dr. Manish Tiwari, Honorable Gopal Kishanji, and the organizers. So thank you very much. I also thank my panelists for giving their views in this August gathering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, speakers. Thank you for your honored presence today. Thank you so much, everybody. Now I request Amrita to take over and begin the proceedings for the next session.
Thank you, ma'am. And I would like to thank all the panelists for tracing back the history and culture of seas, shipping and travel, and linking it to the recent developments in the same. With this, we move on to this next session, the second session of the day, titled Future of Development of Ports and Shipping in India. The panelists for this session will be Shri Amitabh Kumar, Shri Sanjay Sethi, Shri Bhushan Kumar, Mr. Girish Agarwal, Ms. Sanjam Sahi Gupta, and Mr. Subrat Tripathi. This session will be chaired by Shri Amitabh Kumar and moderated by Dr. Manish Tiwari.
Welcome everyone to the next session, which is Future Development of Ports and Shipping in India. This session would be chaired by Shri Sanjay Sethi ji. Sir, you please come in the center, sir. That would be better. I request Sanjam ji to come on the stage, please. Shri Girish Agarwal ji and Shri Subrat Tripathi ji.